Hi guys, welcome to Exploring Light. I'm Sandeep Mathur, a landscape photographer based out of Delhi. This is the third and final part of my Lightroom workflow for merging multiple exposures for editing landscape images. Today we discuss a workflow to merge and blend an HDR focus stack image consisting of two sets of bracketed images with varying focus points. A small disclaimer guys, this series is meant for the slightly experienced user of Lightroom. However, if you're a beginner, I'll try and make it as painless as possible. We've already covered merging and editing a set of three bracketed exposures in our first part. The second part dealt with merging multiple exposures into an HDR panorama. In case you haven't watched part 1 and part 2 of this series, I'll make sure I link it below in the description. This time we merge a set of bracketed exposures, each with varying focus points, so that in the end, in the final image, we have a pin sharp image from foreground to background. Most of this workflow will be in Adobe Lightroom. However, for a brief period, when we merge the focus stack image, we will shift to Adobe Photoshop, but it should be a simple enough process and I'm sure you will have no problem in following along. For this example, I have two sets of three bracketed exposures, one focused on the foreground element, which is the flower, and the second set which is focused on the subject of the image, which is a church in the background. Of course, we could have shot these focus brackets without exposure bracketing, and also we could have taken more than two focus brackets. However, this will depend a little bit on the situation, the lens you're using, the aperture, the focal length, and the placement of the elements. Obviously, as you may have guessed, we will have to modify our workflow a little bit to include a step where we blend the two bracketed exposures into a focus stack image in Adobe Photoshop. So the workflow this time will be to merge the two sets of bracketed images into two bracketed images. Then second step, we will take these two bracketed images and develop it in Lightroom. Third, we will take these two developed raw images into Adobe Photoshop and focus stack them. Then we will come back to Lightroom and follow our usual workflow, that is shaping the light, color grading the image, color dodge and burn, and finally finish the image. So without further ado, let's move to Lightroom. Hi guys, we are now in Lightroom and you should be able to see two sets of images, two sets of three bracketed images. One set, which is labeled purple, is our foreground image where the flower is sharp but the church, the background, is blurred. And the second set of images is where we have the church sharp but our foreground is completely blurred. As you can also see, I've shot this at f11. At f11, when I focus on my foreground element, which is the flower, the background becomes quite blurred because this foreground element is quite near to my camera. Since I wanted to have this pin sharp image from the foreground to the background, I had no option but to shoot focus stacks. In this case, I shot two sets of images. Both sets are bracketed. So the first shot has three exposures, one normal exposure, one dark exposure, and one bright exposure. Then I focused on the church in the background, and again I took three shots, one normal exposure, one underexposed image, which is the difference is -2 if I remember correctly, and then a +2 image, my overexposed image. So if you remember our workflow from the previous two tutorials, we will first merge these exposures and then we do something different that we haven't done up till now. we are going to take these two merged exposures and take them to Photoshop to focus stack these images. So first things first, let's merge these exposures. Let's take the purple set first, which is our foreground set, and select the images, right click, photo merge, HDR, and this will open up the HDR window. And remember, we will check auto align, leave the auto settings unchecked because we want to modify the settings manually. Leave the deghosting at high and create a stack to make our lives easier. That's it. And so I press merge, and since this will take a little time, let me catch up with you guys once both the sets are merged and we're ready with our two merged exposures. So here we are, guys. Lightroom has finished merging process, and we now have two images, one with the purple label, which was, if you remember, our foreground, and the yellow labeled image was our background image. So as you can see, these are pretty dark. So let me start with modifying the exposure. I think that looks good. Let's change the profile to a flat profile, since I want to have some leeway for editing the image. Pull back the highlights a little bit, reduce the contrast, open up the shadows, add some clarity, and then let's set the white balance. I will use the eyedropper tool. Let's take a reading from here, and that's plus 24. Let's remember that value, plus 24. Let's take another value from, say, this gray portion. That's plus 14. And let's see if we can get a decent value from this flower. Plus 66. No, I think that value is too random, and let's ignore that value. So let's work with the plus 14 and plus 24. So that's a difference of 10. If I add, if I divide that by 2, I add 5 to plus 14. That's plus 19. So let's go with plus 19. I will leave that calculation somewhere on the video, and you should be able to see it. Plus 19. And let's set the temperature. To set the temperature, let's increase the vibrance and saturation to maximum. I know this looks horrible, guys, but bear with me. Let's see what are the colors available to us in this image. We increase the temperature a little bit, 3900, 3000, 5000, 5600. Now we begin to see some yellows, 66, and now we see some magentas. So that looks promising, guys. 7300, that looks even better. And now we lose the purples and it's all yellow. So let's pull back a little bit. I want to see what are the maximum colors available in this image, and use that as my temperature. I think somewhere around 7200 and 7300 is a good number. Let's go with 7200 and pull back our vibrance and saturation sliders. Let's sync both these two images. They should be pretty much the same. Make sure that everything is checked, check all, and synchronize. So these are two images, guys, merged and developed. As you can see, this is the yellow image is the one where our church is sharply focused, but our foreground is blurred. And we have the purple labeled image, which is where the church is blurred and our flower is sharp in focus. So now we depart a little bit from our usual workflow. We will take these two images to Adobe Photoshop, align the two images and merge the images so that we have a sharp foreground and a sharp background. And then we come back to Lightroom to finish the editing of the image. So let's select both the two images, right click and edit in. Use this option guys, open as layers in Photoshop. So I click and then I see you in a bit once we are in Photoshop. Okay guys, we are now in Photoshop and we have these two images. You remember we chose the option of open the images as layers in Photoshop. So Photoshop has nicely layered these two images, and you can see a little bit of a movement in these two images, and which is quite normal when you are focus stacking your images, because when you change the focus there is some movement in the images. So the first thing that we do is we align these two images. So we select both the images, go to edit and auto align. We choose the auto function, nothing else needs to be checked, and usually that should do our job for us. And that is the aligned image guys, and now you can see Photoshop has done an excellent job of aligning our images. And the final step in Photoshop is auto blending these images. So edit, auto blend, and we check stack images, we check seamless tones and colors, and that's it. Say OK, and we let Photoshop do its job. Here we are guys. This is our focus tagged image. You can see the flower is nicely in focus and our church is nicely in focus. So this whole image is nice and sharp, pin sharp from foreground to the background. That's it for Photoshop. We save our image, and so guys, we are now back in Lightroom, and this is our TIFF image, focus tagged by Photoshop. As you can see, we have this nice sharp in the foreground, and our church is also nice pin sharp. Here on, let's get back to our normal workflow. So the next step is going to be shaping the light, but first let's crop this image, because when you merge your exposures in Photoshop, it does some weird things in the corners. These problems. So first let's get rid of these problems. I think that looks good. And let's start with our shaping the light by reducing the size of the image. Let's take the graduated filter, put a big feather on it, say 50, reduce the highlights a little bit, open up the shadows because we don't want to darken the church. That's it. Add another one just for the sky this time, and add a little bit of blue in this. Let's add another one here with no color, but let's add a little bit of clarity on this one. Let's pick up the radial filter and add some light. Add some color. Let's just duplicate this filter, another one, and bring it towards our flower, because this is our focus of attention. So let's light this up a little bit. And let's add another one here. Let's make it a little larger. And let's darken the outside. Reduce the feather on this a little bit. I think that's enough. Okay guys, so after shaping the light, let's move to color grading the image, and we will head on to split toning. Let's add some warmth in the highlights, say 30, and increase the saturation a little bit. Yeah, between 25 and 30, say 20, say 28. Add some cool tones in our shadows. Maybe about 15. I think that looks good. Let's have a look at the HSL sliders. Hue, can we move the greens a little bit towards the yellows? I think that looks good. Increase the saturation. Add some green. Let's add some blues. Move to the luminance. Let's see if we can increase the greens a little bit, pull back the blues, add to the oranges. Let's move to the next section, which is color dodge and burn. In color dodge and burn, I'll add some dodging to whatever I want to accentuate, and also at the same time try and push back some of my shadows where I don't really want my viewers to pay any attention. So first we color dodge this flower, maybe a little bit. Yeah, 30, that seems to be okay. Duplicate this. Add one here on this wall. Have another one for the tower. If I had more time, I would do the same thing for rest of the flowers. All these flowers, I would dodge each and every one of these flowers so that they stand out. Also, we will add burn filters. So just take up some of these dark areas and darken them more. There you are guys. I think that looks good. And finally we come to finishing the image. Let's go to detail. As usual, I normally keep my noise reduction fairly low. Since I'm merging the exposures, I don't expect too much noise. Add a little bit of sharpening, say about 40, and I leave the masking. I don't mask. And I think that looks good, guys. Maybe a little bit of vignetting would help this image. only a subtle vignette, maybe -11, and we put a big feather on it. So just to see, that is our vignette, and we will put a big feather on it so that people don't really come to know that we have put a vignette. I think that's about it, and add a little bit of contrast just to finish. A little bit, some clarity. So there you are, guys. This is our original image after our merging and focus stacking, and this is our final edited version, focus stacked with a sharp foreground and a sharp background. So I will see you next in my concluding statements. Hey guys, well, I hope you found my workflow for merging HDR focus stacked images interesting. If you have any questions, just let me know and I'll try and get back to you. In case you would like to have the raw images used in this tutorial to follow along with my process, just drop me a line and I will send you the download link. All we ask you to do is to like, follow and subscribe Xploring Light and me, and just remember guys, these raw images are being provided to you for training purposes only. Please don't use them for any other purpose. In conclusion, we would like to let you know that we have plans to come up with an advanced post-processing tutorial for editing landscape images, which cover all the topics discussed in this series in much greater detail and much greater depth, with many more new techniques and tips. So keep watching this space. Finally, this is me signing off. Goodbye and thanks for watching.